Is Farron Keep actually the ancient and forgotten land of Oolacile? Or as we know it in Dark Souls 1 as Darkroot Garden and Darkroot Basin, before we access the DLC content and learn that it is in fact Oolacile. But for the sake of this video and to avoid any confusion, we'll just keep referring to it as Oolacile, as that is its true name. In short, my theory says yes, Farron Keep is actually Oolacile. Now there are a lot of points I use to argue my theory, so I'll try to keep this as organized as possible. Let me just reiterate a point I like to make a lot, being that there are very few coincidences in the Dark Souls universe. If we find something somewhere, it is typically there for a reason and on purpose, especially in cases we find ourselves backtracking to get said items. Alright, now let's get started before I start rambling. So we know that there are a few things that are native to Oolacile. We know that Princess Dusk is from Oolacile, as well as her guardian Elizabeth the Mushroom and the Mushroom People. Here in Farron Keep, we find a small pack of Grue stationed on a patch of land containing several dead mushrooms. If we travel a little further, we find a small cave which hosts a single corpse praying to a large mushroom figure, who closely resembles Elizabeth. On the corpse, we find the Golden Scroll, which reads, "A golden scroll chronicling the vast research of the Xanthus scholars. Give to a sorcerer to learn the arts of Oolacile. In the lost land of Oolacile, the sorceries orchestrated light and were set to shine golden in hues." And directly next to the corpse, we find a chest containing the antiquated set, which was unique to Princess Dusk in Dark Souls 1. Furthermore, if we continue exploring the swamp, we find Dusk's headpiece itself, the Crown of Dusk, and it states, "Feathered crown bestowed upon the Princess of Oolacile, land of ancient golden sorceries." We could speculate that the corpse we seemingly find praying and or worshipping Elizabeth is Dusk, but I don't find that to be the case, since the Golden Scroll found upon it does state that the scroll is the chronicles that the vast research of the Xanthus scholars have dug up about Oolacile. Curious that twice in a row now, we are invaded in the swamp by Yellowfinger Hazel, who happens to be a Xanthus scholar. Let's take a look at a few of her items, starting with the Xanthus crown. Crown supposedly made in imitation of a divine creature of Oolacile, land of ancient golden sorceries. Xanthus clothing is the mark of a researcher of lost sorceries, and the oversized crown is emblematic of their work. Such a curious pursuit is surely nothing to be ashamed of. Made in imitation of a divine creature of Oolacile, which coincidentally looks like a mushroom. A mushroom that Elizabeth happens to be. I also want to point out the description uses of Oolacile rather than from Oolacile, giving the indication that Elizabeth never left Oolacile for reasons unknown. But to the keen eye, she seems to be stationary, as we see her in Dark Souls 1, without having any arms or legs, which would suggest lack of mobility. Obviously. We are also able to summon Yellowfinger Hazel for the Abyss Watcher's fight. When doing so, she teaches us the proper bow gesture, the exact same gesture that Dusk teaches us in Dark Souls 1. Again, I'm not suggesting Dusk is in this game, you can just see these immense similarities. So we know that the Xanthus scholars study Oolacile specifically, so why are their findings, as well as so many other Oolacile related things here? My best guess is that the best way for a Xanthus scholar to study the arts of Oolacile would be in Oolacile, hence finding all the appropriate clues that help point it out here. Next, I want to talk about a few things that don't have a whole lot of story relation to them, but still enough to strengthen my theory. First, let's talk about the Sable Church of Londo, which we won't go into too much detail right now, but there is a whole lot more I would like to cover in a separate video about the Black Church of Londo. But for now, we'll just look at how they relate to what I'm saying. If we look at Uria's equipment, specifically the build mask, it says, "Attire of the 3 mentors of the Sable Church of Londo. This build mask belongs to Uria, the second eldest. These maidens of a primordial serpent were renowned as founders of the Sable Church, which offered salvation for hollows." Now, let's look at the Dead Again miracle. Londor, the Hollow Realm, is a society of undead comprised of the corpses and shades of those who led unsavory lives. Is such a blessing really something one must ponder? Society of undead, huh? Now where does that sound familiar? It kind of sounds like New Londo from Dark Souls 1. And if this isn't an insinuation that Londor is actually New Londo, we at least know that it's very similar in principle. But what I really want to touch on is the Primordial Serpent, who once made an appearance in New Londo, establishing the Dark Race there by teaching people to invade and pillage humanity. Yuria sells the Dark Hand from her inventory, and that is exclusive to the Dark Wraiths. So it seems safe to assume that the Primordial Serpent in Londor is the same who visited New Londo. Plus, if we kill Yuria, she specifically mentions Koth, confirming undoubtedly that this is the same serpent. We can also assume that Koth was the same Primordial Serpent who tricked the people of Oolacile into digging up Manus to feed off the humanity of the Prime Human. I came to this conclusion thanks to some dialogue with Hawkeye Goff. He says, "But the dark of the abyss, which swallowed poor Arcturus, threatens to devour our entire land of Oolacile. It seems that this dire fate is unavoidable, but seduced by a dark serpent or no, they awoke that thing themselves and drove it mad." I believe he uses the word dark to describe the serpent's intention and not of his color. He goes on to say that the dark emanates from Manus himself, and after encountering the dragon Calamite, he says, "The black dragon troubles you yet, I see?" Which shows the difference he knows between dark and black, which leads me to believe that the dark Primordial Serpent is Koth, since up until now we know he's been behind everything dark. The reason I bring this up is because the spread of the Abyss is very important to the history of Oolacile. The Abyss also relates to New Londo, and now we can assume also the Sable Church of Londor, since Koth is involved. I say this because we find several things in Farron Keep that are directly related to Londor and the Abyss, including, but not limited to, a hollow gem. We know hollows are directly related to the city of Londor. We also know that in order to craft weapons using the hollow gem, we must have the profaned coal, which when given to the blacksmith Andre, he distinctly says that he can see the abyss in this coal. We also find the miracle atonement, which says, "Miracle given to those cast out from the Sable Church of Londor." This is the only tale known by exiles, who believe it carries words of forgiveness. Cursed journeys too must come to an end. We find dark wraiths here as well. Also, looking at a very common enemy here, the Gru, they look very similar to the abyss-infected bloatheads we fight in the Oolacile Township in Dark Souls 1. Since the chosen undead slayed Manus, the abyss stopped consuming Oolacile. So while Oolacile wasn't completely destroyed, the abyss and time definitely left its mark. Now I'd like to take a look at a couple of things that might not be as compelling, but are still more than mere coincidence. In Dark Souls 1, there is a large tower leading from the Undead Burg down into Darkroot Basin, or again, for all intents and purposes, Oolacile. The key for this tower, the Watchtower Basement key, reads, "The basement of the Watchtower forms a stone cell. There are rumors of a hero turned hollow who was locked away by a dear friend, for his own good, of course." I suspect the dear friend to be Gwyn's firstborn, or the Nameless King, but I'll try to uncover all of those shenanigans in a separate video. Anyways, this tower connecting to Oolacile is where we fight Havel the Rock in Dark Souls 1. In Dark Souls 3, at Archdragon Peak, we fight a knight who is either Havel himself or one of his followers. This isn't super important at the moment. The important and peculiar thing about this is after killing the knight in Archdragon Peak, we can travel back to Farron Keep and find atop of what I suspect is the same tower, a corpse containing Havel's equipment. Again, coincidences don't just happen in Dark Souls. I cannot stress that enough. Another less compelling point I'd like to make is the presence of the black bow of Ferris and Ferris's hat. Both can be easily deciphered as replicas, but curious, we find a bowman that drops the exact same items in Dark Souls 1. More curious is that she is located in Oolacile, right outside the Forest Hunters Covenant. Again, with that whole coincidence thing. Am I right? Okay, now we're going to jump into something deeper that I found absolutely spectacular. In Dark Souls 1, we learn about a brave knight and the legend he left behind. His name is Arcturus, one of the 4 knights of Lord Gwyn, who was able to traverse the abyss, fight off Manus, and prevent the consumption of Oolacile. After playing the DLC, we actually learn a very different story about Arcturus, about his nary a murmur of dark, and how it led the abyss to swallowing him and inevitably tainting him. It's not as legendary a story as it is poignant. But what we do learn is that most of the legend of Arcturus the Abyss Walker is actually about the chosen undead. But that isn't super important to what I'm talking about. What is important, though, is the story of bond between man and beast, more specifically, Arcturus and his great grey wolf, Sif. On our way to fight Manus, we can find Sif inside a circle of protection emanating from the great shield Arcturus gave to him. When we fight Sif in Dark Souls 1, we also see him wielding Arcturus' greatsword. We learn from the Soul of Sif, the great grey wolf who guards the grave of Arcturus the Abyss Walker. Use Soul of Sif, who inherited the Divine Knight Sword, to acquire a huge amount of souls or to create a unique weapon. So we can assume that with Arcturus dead and or consumed by the Abyss, both sword and shield belong to Sif. We know the sword was inherited by him, and we can assume the shield as well, since Arcturus left it behind to defend him. To further my point, in order to receive the sword or shield of Arcturus in Dark Souls 1, we have to have the Soul of Sif. We also know that Sif remained in Oolacile to always be near Arcturus' grave. So let me get to the point I'm trying to make with all of this, but first let me point out one more thing. In Dark Souls 1, the Forest Hunters Covenant is run by Alvina. Upon joining, she gives us a ring which reads, Alvina was a trusted friend of Knight Arcturus and the Great Wolf Sif. So boom, we link her to the dynamic duo immediately. When speaking to her, she describes the Forest Hunters as a clan of hunters who track down defilers of the forest graves. With the whole Abyss fiasco, Oolacile is home to many graves of those who were consumed by the dark of the Abyss and those who died trying to fight it back. Forest Hunters are there to protect these sacred graves, just as we know Sif is guarding Arcturus' grave. Alvina also says, the clan is thine own family, to thine kinsmen forever stay true. So defending the graves of those killed staving off the Abyss and the concept of family are strong traditions and beliefs held by the Forest Hunters of Oolacile. We see a very, very similar pattern here in Farron Keep. The Covenant item for the Watchdog of Ferren reads, Ancient medallion depicting the crest of a wolf, symbolizes the pact with the Old Wolf of Ferren, equipped to pledge oneself to the Watchdogs of Ferren. The Watchdogs ensure that the warriors sleep in serenity by taking the form of loyal spirits and hunting down those who would trespass the woods of Ferren. A wolf here in a land seemingly that is Oolacile, defending the rest of warriors slain fighting off the Abyss, summoning warriors to defend the land. That sounds like exactly what the Forest Hunters Covenant did in Oolacile in Dark Souls 1. In fact, it is exactly what they did. If we look at the Cinders of a Lord we receive from defeating the Abyss Watchers, it says, The Watchers of the Abyss swore upon their shared wolf's blood, which also served as their mandate as lords. So we can see from this description the strong concept of unity and family, their shared wolf blood. In fact, upon killing the Abyss Watchers, we receive the soul of the blood of the wolf, and it states, The blood was spread amongst the Abyss Watchers, and their souls are one with the soul of the Wolfblood Master. Again, we see the ideology of unity and connection. We also can transpose the Wolf Knight's greatsword from this soul, or rather, Arcturus' greatsword that was inherited by Sif with this soul. Seemingly the same soul we used in Dark Souls 1 to get the same sword. To guess who this wolf might be, do I really need to bring up coincidences again? Protecting the grave in memory of Arcturus is something Sif has always held dear and been steadfast in doing. There are 2 covenant rewards from the Watchdogs of Ferren I would like to reference before I start wrapping it up. I know, you shouldn't even need more convincing, but I'm going to do it anyways. The first item we'll look at is the wolf ring, and it reads, ring associated with Abysswalker Arcturus, one of the 4 Knights of Gwyn, the First Lord. Okay, very blunt and simple enough. Why does this wolf have it? I can't think of any other wolves that fancied Arcturus. Next is the Wolf Knight's Great Shield, which states, Great Shield of a Knight tainted by the dark of the Abyss, a master of the wolf's blood of Ferren. So from this, we learn that is Arcturus' great shield, which is bestowed upon Sif. It also confirms Sif is the wolf whose blood unites the Abyss Watchers, as Arcturus was his master. And we see in the description that Arcturus was the master of the wolf's blood. Just to confirm this even further, we'll look at the Wolf Knight helm, which we know bears an exact semblance to Arcturus' armor, and it says, Helm of a Knight tainted by the dark of the Abyss. The twilight blue tassel is damp and will ever remain so. A vanquished knight left behind only wolf's blood and legacy of duty. The undead legion of Ferren was formed to bear his torch, and the armor of these Abyss Watchers suggests their own eventual end. We know Arcturus left Sif behind in the Ring of Protection to save him and to try to take the Abyss on himself. So we know that the wolf and its blood spoken of is indeed Sif. We can also make the assumption that since this wolf of Ferren has both the wolf ring and the great shield of Arcturus, that it is in fact an old and dying Sif, who has given everything including his soul and blood to continue to fight the Abyss that once took his master. To prove this point even further, I want to dissect the word Ferren. We know this is Farron's Keep. We also know the wolf in charge of the Watchdogs of Ferren's Covenant is called Old Ferren. Another thing we know is that the name of Arcturus seems to be forgotten, as all of his gear is called the Wolf Knight. We can also make the assumption that if the name Arcturus could be forgotten, certainly the less known name Sif could be as well. Anyway, back to Ferren. The name Ferren derives from the Latin and Old French ferrum and or ferrant, which roughly translates to iron gray hair, or one who habitually wore gray. So if we use this in replace of Ferren, we would call it the wolf's blood of iron gray, or blood of Sif the Great Grey Wolf. Or we would call them Iron Grey's watchdogs, or we could call the old wolf Ferren, or Old Iron Grey. But as for me, I just like to call him Sif. Given the loyalty we see from Sif and how much unity, loyalty, and blood meant to both the Force Hunters of Oolacile and the Watchdogs of Ferren, then we have to believe that no matter what, Sif would continue to uphold his duties of guarding Arcturus' grave and the rest of the world from the Abyss. And if he is here, then we know Farron's Keep is indeed Oolacile. Thank you everyone for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave me your thoughts and your theories in the comments section. A great deal of this game is simply speculation and forming ideas, so please share why you think I'm wrong or why you think I'm right. It's all part of the fun. And if you did like this video, please consider liking and sharing. And of course, subscribe to my channel for my Dark Souls lores and theories. We'll catch you next time on the Ashen Hollow.